You know, at Milk Street, we've learned that you can quickly transform your cooking using spices. So here are some of our favorite tips and techniques for using them. First up, Josh and I discuss how to shop for and also store spices. You know, here at Milk Street, we've learned the hard way that to make cooking easier, if you just start with big flavors, you end up with big flavors without a lot of time and effort and actually technique as well. And the easiest way to do that, of course, is to use spices. So spices can completely change your cooking. You don't need to have dozens of spices. You know, in Turkey, they might actually have dozens of spices. In Northern Europe, they might have 2 spices, and my mother had 1, which was cinnamon. But you can actually change your cooking by just using spices, individual spices, or blends. So the first question really is how to buy them. And so, you know, very often I go into a store, there's a big vat of spices, or I go in the supermarket. So how do you buy spices?
Well, whenever you're dealing with spices, you typically want to buy them whole, simply because they have less surface area and they're going to deteriorate at a slower rate. But on top of that, you'll also want to buy them in smaller amounts, so that way you know you're going to use all of them.
I know people say 6 months or something. I just take the top off and smell it. And I've had spices, I brought some back from Morocco a few years ago, and after a couple of years, some of those were actually still really bright. So I don't think there's an actual time limit. I think it just depends on the spice, right?
Yeah, there's really no one set rule for when a spice will expire. But the #1 way to tell, go ahead and toss some of those spices into a dry pan and toast them up. If they become super aromatic, they're good to go, even if you've held on to them for a year.
And if they don't, dump them. In the next clip, Josh demonstrates an easy technique, blooming. Now, we like to bloom spices in butter or oil instead of toasting them dry. And this is when you want the fat to help carry the flavor of the spice evenly throughout a dish. We also do this when we're looking to add body to a lean dish like lentil soup, and also add a final burst of flavor all in one step.
Blooming is when you heat spices in a hot fat, be it butter, ghee, or oil. The flavor changes in 2 different ways. Firstly, there are a lot of the aromas and flavors in the spices that are fat soluble. So as soon as they come in contact with that oil, they'll release those flavors and aromas and really infuse the entire fat with the flavor of the spice. Secondly, the heat from the oil activates a number of chemical reactions, which change the flavors and create new flavor compounds. We love to do this as a finishing touch for our Turkish red lentil soup, and all it takes are 2 ingredients and 2 minutes. First things first, we'll add in olive oil to a cool pan, and we'll bring that up to temperature over medium heat. And we'll swirl that olive oil in the pan just to coat the interior, and to that we will then add in Aleppo pepper. We'll swirl that around again, and once this oil takes on that bright red color of the Aleppo pepper and becomes extremely aromatic, we're ready to pull this off the heat and use as our finishing touch on our Turkish red lentil soup.
In season 4 of Milk Street Television, I traveled to the Galilee Valley and cooked with Reem Kassis. She's the author of The Palestinian Table. She showed me how her family makes spice blends and also uses them for easy weeknight meals. What are we cooking today?
So we're cooking chicken and potato bake. Very simple. It's spiced with allspice, olive oil, my mother's 9-spice mixture.
You know, the idea of a tray bake is something I heard just recently, about a year ago, from Nigella Lawson. But I guess it's not really an English thing because we're here in a Palestinian kitchen and you're doing tray bakes.
We call it siniye or sawani, plural. It just literally means tray.
Families have their own spice mixtures. It's not like there's one, you know, ras al hanout or something.
No.
So you have a 9-spice mixture. What's in that?
Pimento, allspice, cinnamon. There's nutmeg, there's mace, there's cloves, there's cardamom, there's cumin, there's coriander, and black pepper.
I mean, this is richly colored. It looks great.
Well, let's try it and see if it tastes as good as it looks. So these are all legs, so the meat should be juicier than
You can't overcook it.
I love the crispy skin. Let me get you some nice crispy potatoes as well. Do you want me to show you how I do it?
You mean squeezing the garlic?
I just squeeze it out. Then it's kind of like your own sauce.
Great flavor. There's no pre-cooking. There's the marinating of the chicken. Throw in the oven, you're done.
And also the chicken doesn't overcook. So let's say you have company coming and they're late. You keep the oven on, but at a lower heat. It'll be fine because of the juices. It'll keep it moist. And even on a weeknight, it's super quick. You come home from work, you throw it in, and within an hour, it's done.
You know, years ago, I swore I would never do baked chicken parts again. But every time I swear off something, I ended up doing it anyway. So when I was visiting Reem Cassis in the Galilee Valley, she made a tray bake, which just means on a sheet pan, and it was unbelievably good. And it was because her family has a spice mix with 9 different spices, and she roasts these whole spices every couple of months and keeps them fresh and uses it on everything. So the takeaway here is make your own spice mix, and she puts that on everything. And it's just this go-to way to take something as boring as baked chicken parts and turns them into something. I made it for Christmas, actually. It's just great. You've made it recently, right?
I've made it a bunch of times. It's part of my repertoire. It's our favorite kind of recipe, right? It's simple, but packs a ton of flavor. Yeah. And a lot of that is because of this really great spice blend. And that's what we're gonna make here. So we have 9 beautiful.
9, count them. Yeah.
They're beautiful spices. We're using whole spices that we're gonna toast and then grind ourselves. That's the best way to get a lot of flavor out of your spices. We have allspice, we have black pepper, cardamom pods, we have coriander, cinnamon sticks that we broke in half, cumin seed, some cloves, nutmeg. It's a piece of nutmeg that's just kind of cut in half. And then we have blades of mace. And this is something that's kind of unusual. You don't see it very often. Typically we find ground mace, so if you can't find blades of mace, you can just add ground mace to your spice blend after it's already ground up. So I'm gonna put these in a cool skillet. And we do that when we toast spices so that we don't overcook them and burn them. So I'm just gonna drop all these guys in here.
Well, you want to just say a word about why we're starting with whole spices?
So we're using whole spices here. We are allowed to toast them in the pan. We get a lot of flavor out of it. We're gonna grind them ourselves. And then you can keep this spice blend for up to 3 months. We're gonna make probably about a cup of this.
Whole spices that you toast and turn into ground spices is about 20 times better than buying ground spices at the supermarket.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm just gonna turn this on over low to medium heat. Again, we don't want these spices to burn. So we're gonna toast these really just until we can smell them. And then you wanna immediately take them out of the pan and let them cool. We wanna make sure that they're cool before we put them in the grinder. Some of the steam that comes off that can affect its texture and flavor. So I have all those spices that we toasted. They cooled. They're in this spice grinder. We're gonna grind them up. All right. Smells amazing.
Wow.
It's so different than if you just put a bunch of ground spices in a bowl. Wouldn't have this amazing smell to it. So look at this meal on a sheet tray. It looks beautiful. Am I right?
And you did not lie, because the garlic is not over roasted.
It's beautifully browned right there in its little safe haven.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna take the chicken and the potatoes off. The skin is actually really nice and brown. You can still smell all of those spices.
Well, this is sort of like spatchcocking a chicken, right? I mean, you're cooking it in one layer, so the white and dark meat,
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about.
So as I said, we're gonna make a really great simple pan sauce right here on the sheet tray.
Oh, this is juicy. Oh, this is like when I first had it with Reem Cassis. I was going like, baked chicken parts. I didn't quite get it. And then I took a taste. It was like, it was just amazing. And I've made this dish many times. So it's a little ode to homemade spice mixes.
Exactly.
Right? Today we want to talk about an ingredient, and then we're going to make a recipe called seared pork tenderloin with smoked paprika and oregano. But it's all about the smoked paprika. So this is pimentón de la vera. This comes from Spain, of course, in between Madrid in Portugal and a valley. And it's very different than, let's say, Hungarian paprika. That are dried peppers, dried with fans and in heaters. This is an area that's actually fairly rainy. So they do this over a wood fire. They don't do sun-dried. And they do it for a week to 2 weeks. So it's a very slow process. they don't want the heat to get over 120 degrees because that'll cook the peppers. So if you smell this, it's very, very, very smoky. It's a totally different product. And it's one of those things that they would use on any dish, you know, migas, which is the scrambled eggs with the ham, just put it on top of almost anything. So it's one of those game changer ingredients that requires very little work, but just adds a ton of flavor. So we'll start with some olive oil. We have dried oregano. We have the pimenton de la vera, which is the smoked paprika, and a little bit of sugar. Now, in lots of cultures, even here at Milk Street, a lot of recipes start by toasting spices in oil or dry toasting them in a skillet. Smoked paprika, pimenton, has so much flavor and so much smokiness, you don't really do that. So we'll be brushing this on right at the end of cooking. We're not going to start by brushing this on the meat at the beginning. We're going to brush each side with a little bit of the sauce. You can really smell that smoked paprika. Comes right off the pan. The 4 halves are cooked and they're on a platter. We have a little bit of this remaining sauce on top. And we're just going to let this sit for 5 minutes. So now it's rested. We have a little bit of fresh oregano. Take a piece. So that looks great. It's a nice thin piece of pork tenderloin, not overcooked. You know, it's amazing how just a small amount of smoked paprika just flavors an entire dish. It's delicious. So this is a great example of what we love best here at Milk Street. Take a sort of plain thing like pork tenderloin. It cooks very quickly, but that smoked paprika, which is really the essential ingredient here, just adds so much flavor. So you transform something common into something extraordinary with just essentially one ingredient. So seared pork tenderloin with smoked paprika and fresh oregano. It's a great Tuesday night dinner or any night of the week. I hope you've learned a few new tips that will change the way you cook. Now you can get to work in your own kitchens and improve just about anything with the use of spices. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Shellman. I'm the Chief Philanthropy Officer here for PBS KVIE, and I'm so glad you could join us for today's presentation just for you, our leadership donors. Christopher Kimball had some excellent tips and insight about spices, and I don't know about you, it's the lunch hour here on the West Coast. I'm pretty hungry, so I'm not going to stand between you and our forthcoming cooking demonstration. We are going to explore making and using a spice blend with our special guest chef. And if you're cooking along with us, this is a great time to get your materials ready. If you're not in the kitchen, I'm certainly not to worry. We will send you a copy of the recording after the event so you can revisit the recipe steps at your own pace. I'm very pleased to introduce you to our guest, Rosie Gill. Rosie is the Director of Education at Milk Street Cooking School, and she has her hands in all of the wonderful recipes, those ones you just saw with Christopher Kimball. She's the one behind the scenes making all those delicious combinations, and we're really thrilled to have her today from her kitchen. If you have questions, I want to encourage you to please put those into the chat during the demonstration. We'll make sure to leave a few minutes at the end to make sure we get to them all. But without further ado, Rosie, today you're making a crispy chickpea dish. It sounds delicious, so let's get started.
Hi, Colleen. Thanks for the introduction. I'm just going to make sure that we can get the video started on my countertop. Steve, I'm going to ask you for some help with that because my phone doesn't have co-host powers. But that video clip you just saw got me hungry, but also got me really excited to teach you how to blend spices. That clip with Reem Cassis was so important. It's really a great, fun, educational tool to make your own spice blends. But the key in there that she mentioned is you only have to do this once every 3 months, right? So like, I feel like when I teach all my students at the cooking school, they get a little like, oh, that's 9 spices. I have to toast them. But you do it once every 3 months. You build your house signature blend, your own personal blend, and you do that work. It takes 15 minutes. And then dinner, a great dinner like that tray bake, takes you 5 minutes of prep time because you put in a little work in advance. Or you find one single spice like that smoked paprika that Chris was talking about with the pork tenderloin. And you can see that actually spices have the capacity to elevate and transform your cooking on their own. You don't have to build a spice blend, but we're going to build one today. If you want to participate, I'm going to ask for a lot of questions of all of you, because I think it's more fun if we do this together. So you can throw answers in the chat and Colleen can help me answer them if I don't see them while I'm cooking. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the elements of a great spice blend. And then I'm going to teach you how to build your own spice blend. And then together, we're going to build a KVIE custom signature spice blend just for you all. And we'll make sure that in the email afterwards, you get the proportions. So if it sounds good, you can try it and you can make a bunch and hold it for 3 months and let us know what you use it on. So do we have my tabletop going? Let me see. Yep. Let me get my camera going. Great. Okay. So if you are cooking along, let's just review what ingredients you need quickly, and then we'll get started. So you need, as you can see down here, this is a can of chickpeas that they've been rinsed and dried, and drying them is super important so that we can brown the outside really quickly and keep the insides nice and moist. These are not like the snack crispy chickpeas you buy. These are these things with a crispy fried outside and this luxuriously velvety inside and that spicy crust. So they're wildly different than snack chickpeas. I think these are a lot better. But the key to getting them to have that textural contrast is to make sure that they're well dried. You also need a 1/4 cup of oil. I chose a neutral oil because I have no idea what our custom spice blend is going to be. But if you know that you love, for example, Mediterranean flavors, you can choose an olive oil. If you know that you love the flavors of Northern India, you might choose ghee, you might choose coconut oil, any fat works, okay? Because we're not gonna heat this so super high that you need to worry about an extra virgin olive oil or something burning. You also want 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. This is for later to help the chickpeas brown. And then you need a little bowl that has a 1/2 teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of sugar. This is just going to make our spice blend taste a ton better. And tasting ground spices on their own is not pleasant, one could say. A little salt, a little sugar will help us develop a great blend. And then quick, I'll just show you. I have a bunch of spices waiting for us over there. And so you just want access to your spice cabinet. These are whole spices for us to be talking about later. So, okay, I'm going to screen share something so we can talk about the fundamentals of a great spice blend. While I'm doing that, I would just love to get to know you all a little bit. Throw in your desert island spice into the chat. What's the one spice you can't cook without? Mine currently is Aleppo pepper, but yesterday it was cumin. You tell me, what's yours? All right, and let me screen share so you can see this cool chart that you're gonna get. So when you're building a great spice blend, let me say something controversial to help you build, let's build a picture together. Pumpkin pie spice blend, it's everywhere. You can get a latte, you can get a candle. There's one thing about pumpkin pie spice blend that is tricky. And I'm going to give you a second in case anyone wants to participate. If you look at these categories, where do all of the flavors from pumpkin pie spice blend come from? If anyone wants to throw something in the chat, and Colleen, you can tell me if anyone answers. We'll give it a few seconds.
You bet. We've got some desert island spices coming through. One of those is ginger, which I think is part of your pumpkin pie spice.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love ginger?
I know, it's so good.
We've got cinnamon coming through.
Nice. Well, both of those come from this category, so I'll just jump in. All of the pumpkin pie spice blends are warming. Remember when I talked about the texture on those chickpeas and that what we're looking for is to build contrast? Well, contrast is the cornerstone of all great cooking. So you need to build contrast into your spice blends as well. And that can be really simple. It could just mean that to your pumpkin pie spice blend, you add a big crank of fresh black pepper. Didn't that perk up? I would love some muffins or a slice of pie that had that extra add of dimension, right? It just makes eating more fun. And that's kind of the point, right? We want to have a good time. It helps us explore. It helps us like look forward to the chore that can be cooking, to the delight that is eating, right? So when we're building a spice blend, we want to keep contrast in mind. In the simple rule for starting, right? This is just starting, and I'll go over aspirational spice blending in a minute, is that you choose just 3 spices, only 3, but you choose them from 2 categories. Don't choose 3 from 3 different categories. Set yourself some strict boundaries. You choose 3 spices from 2 categories. What this does is the 2 spices from the same category make sure that the spice blend has sort of a point of view, right? It's coherent. It's not going to be everything in the kitchen sink. But then that 3rd spice provides the contrast. And with these chickpeas, it's to date, and I have made these hundreds of times with hundreds of students. So I'm not in control of the spice blend. The students are doing their own thing and I have to eat them all, right? Because when we teach in-person classes, I'm sampling everything. Or when we do our live stream classes like this, the students, hundreds of them, we crowdsource our spice blends. I have never had a bad one. So
Well, and Rosie, we've got a couple of great ones that came through. I just want to mention, we've got thyme that was mentioned. Teresa says her desert island flavor is ancho chili pepper. And we also have Michael out there with basil.
So for the ancho chili pepper person, Teresa, I believe, I encourage you to try something called Urfa pepper. So it's a Turkish pepper that's also got those chocolatey notes and a little bit of dried berry flavors. Just if you want to, if you like that flavor profile and you sort of want to expand what you work on, try Urfa pepper. And I have some in my cabinet, and later I can get it if we want it. So here's how you would build, how we are going to build our custom spice blend. But let's practice once before we actually cook. Let's just practice once. Anyone in the chat, name any spice. The first spice that comes to mind.
We have chili flakes coming through.
Great. Okay, so that's spice 1. Now, any other spice for spice number 2? Any spice?
Just a quick reminder to our attendees, when you're using chat, if you make sure your message is set to everyone, we'll all see what you're putting in the chat. I think we've got some direct messages accidentally happening. Okay, we've got oregano from Teresa.
Ooh, nice. Okay, so we have dried oregano and we have chili flakes. So according to our formula, the 3rd spice has to come from that fiery spicy or that herbal menthol category. So the first person to say one spice from either of those categories.
So it looks like mustard seeds is in the pungent category, and we also had cumin coming in.
Can't use them.
Can't use those. So we need something from the herbal menthol category. Does anyone have a fan favorite?
Or fiery spicy. It can be either of the 2.
Ooh, we have bay leaves.
Oh, this is great because you can grind bay leaves, or any spice blend can also be used whole. So let's talk about proportions, and I'll stop sharing my screen for a little bit. So proportions, we have chili flakes, dried oregano, and bay. So you can see that the personality is going towards that herbal menthol, right? A little woodsy, bay's got some lemon notes. So it's sort of bright. And the chili flakes are going to be a little punchy, right? They're a little bit passionate in there. When you think about building a spice blend, not only do you have to think about contrast, you want to think about proportions, right? If we chose to make this 2/3 chili flakes and split the remaining third between oregano and bay, that's fine. And it may be an awesome spice rub, but it's going to be really punchy, right? It's going to be fiery. You just want to consider those things. For this one though, I'm thinking of this for fish. So this flavor profile, I'd want to maybe go ahead and put a little of this on some fish fillets before I sear them, or maybe I'd make a stew with some whole spices and then pull whole chili pods, pull whole bay leaves out later. And so for that, I'm going to go with a little bit more proportions in the herbal menthol. And maybe I'll do 2 parts of oregano and bay and 1 part chili flake. Right, but so that's how you want to think about it. What's the effect you want the spice blend to have on you? Do you want it to heat you up and be fiery? Then you'll use more chili flakes. Do you want it to be sort of a little more reminiscent of something sweeter and more calming? It is a little more bay and oregano, right? So you guys, that would have been winning for these chickpeas. And if your second spice blend isn't as good, we're going with number 1. Okay, I'm just letting you know. Okay, so when we look down here, before we build our real spice blend and get going, I just want to talk about what spice blends can become. Because I want to make sure I pay credit and I honor the history of spice blending and the complexity. And we really saw tribute to that with Reem Cassis and her mother's 9-spice blend. Spices, to begin, you start with our really simple instructions of 3 spices from 2 categories. But there is a true art and expertise to blending spices, where there is a real elegance that you can blend from multiple categories and you still taste every spice. And that comes with a lot of experience and often time. And by time, I mean like centuries of spices coming up together in a cuisine. So here's an example. And I'm going to name the spices and points to anyone who can tell me what this spice blend is. We have cinnamon and cloves. So those are from our sweet warming category. Bay and cardamom from the herbal menthol. Cumin and coriander from the pungent and grounding. And a lot of black pepper from the fiery. So we have contrast. And we really just have this immense array of flavors. So did we get anyone calling in the chat who knows what this is?
I am looking to see, do we have any guesses coming through? I know we've got some avid home chefs in the chat here. Don't be shy.
I'll give you a clue. It comes from India. Any guesses?
I think you may have stumped the audience.
This is a northern garam masala, a northwestern garam masala. So Indian cuisine is very regional. There's real differences even within region, but this is a northwestern garam masala for Julie Sawhney's cookbook, classic vegetarian Indian cuisine. It's a great cookbook. So this is our aspiration, right? This is our goal, something this beautiful that has this much complexity, but we're just going to start a little more simple. So before we let's build our spice blend and then we'll get to getting the chickpeas going. So first, and I should say first, Colleen, are there any other questions that have popped up about cooking that I should address before we jump in?
Not yet. I think we're ready to jump in.
Okay, great. So let me share my screen one more time, because now this is our signature spice blend. Although I've remembered number 1 because it sounds so good, in case number 2 somehow is the first ever not to work, but I doubt that. You all are smart. Okay. So 3 spices from 2 categories, and then we'll build proportions later once the chickpeas are frying. So I just need the first spice. If I don't have it, I may have to ask for a second one. But the first spice you see on this chart that we get in the chat.
It looks like we have thyme from Susan.
Great, I have that. Okay, so we have thyme, herbal menthol category. All right, the second spice can come from any category.
Sweet paprika.
Oh, perfect, I have it.
Thank you, Susan.
Great, so that's pungent and grounding. So the paprikas that aren't spicy are much more savory because they've almost got dry, sun-dried tomato flavors. We learned a little bit about one of the ways that paprikas are processed. So we have the pungent grounding category and the herbal menthol category. So the third spice has to come from one of those two categories. Which is it?
We just got Mary Phil says cumin.
Oh, this is so good. This is almost better than the first one. I love it. You all are smart. You're great. You set me up for an awesome afternoon snack. Okay, perfect. So I've got our 3 spices. And now let's talk about getting the chickpeas going. We're going to segue to a tiny bit of a heat lesson, and then we'll talk about proportions. As you learned when Chris was making the pork tenderloin, we're not going to add these spices until the end because we don't want to burn them. Okay, so let me just move. Well, let's look. Yeah, let me move this more like this for right now. Okay, so we're going to get our 1/4 cup of oil is in, it can be a cast iron pan or a stainless steel pan. Non-stick's not great because the pan needs to get pretty hot. So I just want to call attention to that. And we're going to heat this until it's shimmering. So I'm going to put it on medium high, not too high. We don't want this to go too quickly. While we do that, we've got our can of well-dried chickpeas. Now you could also totally make this from chickpeas you made from scratch. It's just that a can is convenient. So that is what we use, but it's 1.5 cups. If you make it from scratch, it's 1.5 cups. And we're going to go ahead and put them in this sieve. And then we're going to add that cornstarch. And what the cornstarch is going to do is help wick away some remaining moisture, which is great, and capture it so we get good browning. But it's also going to add a starch that is different from the starches that's in chickpeas. And that's going to help build complex browning. The more types of starch and protein that you brown, the more those molecules can break down under heat and recombine to create new flavor compounds. It's called, when there's just starches, caramelization. When there's starches and proteins, it's called the Maillard reaction. So they look like little snowballs. This is perfect. And we just have a little bit of cornstarch here at the bottom. Oh, and some rogue chickpeas, which I'll grab. But that extra cornstarch, if you leave it on, can make them gummy. And then that's just not a desirable texture. While the oil, so why we need to heat this oil up so hot is you want to remember 2 temperatures. This is our little heat side lesson. Water boils, turns into steam at 212. Browning happens most quickly at 300 degrees and above. So as long as there is water on the surface of something, you actually won't brown very quickly or at all in that area where there is actually water, because it keeps it at 212. So then we want to get this pot really hot so that the browning starts right away when our dry chickpeas go in. So we've taken care of the water issue here. And then our chickpeas are already cooked. We only want them in the pan long enough for the outside to get crispy. We don't want the inside to get dry out, right? So we want the pan nice and hot so the browning happens really quickly. Another way to say it is we want the browning to happen really quickly so the chickpeas are dry and the pan is nice and hot. Does that make sense? All right, so my pan is getting there. I can smell the oil a little, which you can. And what you can always do is throw 1 or 2 chickpeas in and see if you get a sizzle, which I do. Well, I'm just going to let it get a little hotter. It's always good to be patient. I'm just going to let it get a little bit hotter. And then we're going to put our chickpeas in here in 1 layer so that we get a lot of surface contact. There we go. Now we got some sizzle. That's good. Just going to grab my spatula. I'm going to toss them around in the oil, and then I'm going to press them into 1 layer. And while they brown, we're going to build our spice blend. Colleen, do we have any questions yet?
You know, there are quite a few questions asking about the proper pronunciation of paprika.
Yeah. I was wondering if that would come up because Chris said paprika, right? It's preference. In Spanish, it's actually paprika, right? So it's completely different. So you choose. And and paprika is also used in Hungary. I do not speak Hungarian. I don't know what the accent would say. So you choose. I also want to mention one other thing. In the pre-notes, we talked about, or when we had that slideshow, it said herbs were the leaves and spices were the other parts. We often consider the dried leaves, not fresh leaves, dried leaves, spices. Hence, we're able to use thyme right now and bay leaves. Okay, let's talk about proportions, and we can go over here for a sec so we can talk about building our spice blend. So again, remember, I have a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and a half teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of sugar in here for flavor development. You could leave the sugar out. I think it really makes everything pop. It's an acid, so it's a little bit like having a little lemon juice in there, so the flavors really pop. So we have sweet paprika, we have thyme, and we have cumin. Dried thyme is a strong flavor. So another way you figure out what proportions are is when you have something like turmeric or nutmeg or dried thyme, they're strong. And so a little goes a long way. We only need 2 teaspoons total. So I'm going to use a half teaspoon of dried thyme. I'm going to add it right in here. Okay. And then I've got paprika and cumin. I don't think you can have enough cumin in your life, so I'm going to put a full teaspoon of cumin. It's really grounding. It's a little smoky, which is lovely. It's one of the spices that I feel really benefits from buying whole and grounding your own. It's not like I do all the time. I have ground cumin in my house. Absolutely. But the flavor you get, that development of flavor from grinding your own, whether you toast it first or not, is pretty extraordinary. Fennel is another surprising one. Okay, and then we have sweet paprika. So I'm going to do half a teaspoon of that. So we have our 2 grounding spices and our 1 herbal menthol spice. I'm just going to get this open. And I'm so glad we have the sweet paprika because this color is going to be beautiful. Another thing to think about when you're cooking with spices is that often the culinary cue is cook until aromatic, but spices start aromatic. So make sure you smell them before you start cooking, when they're raw. So what you notice is an intensification of aroma, not the onset of aroma, right? If you say cook until aromatic, well, the second they go in the pan, it's going to be aromatic. You want to cook them until you notice a change, an intensification in the aroma. Okay, we're going to check.
Rosie, we have some popping chickpeas in the audience. Folks are letting you know how it's going.
Oh, so yes, some of them are popping out of the pan, you mean? You can
Popping like popcorn.
Yes, so your pan may be a little too hot. So what can happen is, like with popcorn, the moisture from inside the chickpeas comes out. You can use a splatter screen if you want while you fry them up, but you can also reduce the temperature of your pan, and that might help. What you're looking for, let's see if we can actually capture this on screen, is browning that is at least like up here. So significant browning. So I'm going to let these cook for another minute. What other questions have come into the chat while we've been cooking? I need to kill, 30 seconds here.
Well, we have a fun question, which is about your name, Rosemary, and
Yes.
how you ended up being a chef. Is there any correlation, or is it just happenstance?
Well, I'm surprised no one said your name is Rosemary Gill. Because you must be a great fish cooking teacher. That's what I get a lot. I don't know if my name had anything to do with it, but I became a cooking teacher in a very odd way. Like many people who love to cook and eat, I grew up in a household where cooking was really important. But my true love, my first love, not my true love, my first love professionally was in the arts. And sort of in your all's area, actually, I lived in San Francisco for a while, and there's a market there called Buy Right Market, and they had a community center called 18 Reasons. I went in as the curator, but I left as the executive director. And in the process, I offered like 250 or something cooking classes a year that other people taught because it wasn't my background. But you do that for enough years and you've really gone to culinary school. So I still have art in my life. I'm not an artist, but I work at a sculpture park, or I'm involved in a sculpture park. So I approach it from that point of view and my love of home cooking. So my joy is teaching people how to be creative and artistic and feel proud of their home cooking, purely from the point of view is that it's something we need to do. And how can we make it delightful and pleasurable as much as possible? Not every day it can be, and that's a reality. So that's how I got into food professionally. These chickpeas look wonderful. I'm going to adjust my camera so you can see how golden brown they are. See if I can get this right. So those are beautiful. So we're going to turn this heat off. And what we're going to do is put the spice blend in now and stir it around in this residual heat, which means leftover heat, which is a great way to do anything delicate. So when I cook a fish fillet, I sear one side really high, then I flip it over, take the pan off heat, put the top on, and let the fish finish cooking really gently, because then I have more control. Same thing here. I've turned the pan off. I'm stirring it to keep the pan temperature cool. And this way my spices won't burn and they smell amazing. I think our custom spice blend's a winner. All right, so that is your spice blending 101 lesson. You made this beautiful paprika, thyme, and cumin spice blend. I'll send the proportions to everyone. And you learned how to make some crispy chickpeas, learned a little bit about heat. That's the end of our little demonstration, but I'm happy and delighted to answer any questions about spices that have to relate to what you learned here or in the video that we saw before we started cooking.
Terrific. Well, we do have some coming through. So we have one from Susan. Do you recommend buying spices in bulk or in jars and cans?
Sure. Susan's a great question, and sourcing is a question we get all the time. It depends on where you're buying them from. So if you can go somewhere where you know the bulk supply is turned over quickly, it's an awesome way to buy spices because you can try just a little of something and you can see if you like it. So I highly recommend it if it's a place that you know is turning them over pretty quickly. It's a great, safe, like really risk-free to experiment with spices. Another way is, though, you can buy a whole jar or can, something like this size, from a spice vendor that you really trust, because there's a big movement in spice sourcing, which is to think about single source spicing or single spice sourcing. So you actually go to a farmer or a region and you buy spices from them. It's hard to get those in bulk. They're of an extraordinary quality. They tend to not come in huge jars. So in that case, I would definitely buy the jar. In the end, get the spices you can get. If you can only get them in large jars, you can store them in the freezer. The two things that are the enemy of spices in terms of they're losing their potency are light and heat. So just keep them out of the light, keep them out of the heat, and any spice you have, you can make the most of once you know a little technique like you learned today.
That's great. We have another question about the author of the cookbook that you mentioned.
Sure.
Susan's asking, is that Pavani Nandula?
It was Julie Sahni, Sahni. She writes sometimes for the New York Times. She's been writing cookbooks for decades. And this one is classic. I think it's vegetarian and grain cooking, a classic Indian vegetarian and grain cooking. I believe that's the title.
That sounds really good. Do you have any suggestions of other cookbooks that really explore spices that folks might be interested in checking out?
There are so many. So there are some. So actually, Padma Lakshmi has a cookbook or a book just on spices, and it's a great reference book. Lior Lev Serkaz owns a company called La Boite in New York. He also has deep knowledge on spices, and some of his cookbooks just talk about the spice and how to use it. So if you're sort of interested in where the spice comes from, what flavors it pairs well with, and then maybe just some recipe suggestions, that's another great example. Zoe Ajonyo is a British Ghanaian chef, and she has a cookbook, My Ghana Kitchen. And so she uses a lot of the spices that you would use in Ghana. That's another great cookbook. I could go on and on and on, but I'll stop there.
Well, we have a couple other questions for you. It sounds like this is very hard to make a mistake with combining spices, but what are some common mistakes people can make when cooking with spice, and how to come out of that and when you're in the middle of a dish?
Sure. So I think it's great if you're going to start blending your own. Let's start first with some ways to maybe help guarantee your success. So 2 things. Is there a recipe that has spices that list them individually that you love? Look at those spices, look at the proportions they're in, what categories do they come from, and maybe just try making a bulk version of that spice blend. Whatever proportions are in that recipe, multiply it times 4, make yourself a little jar and start experimenting with it in other recipes. Or look at those spices and their proportions and maybe swap out one, if cumin's in it, for a different spice that's in that same category. Keep it in the same proportions. And that's one way to learn. So take a recipe you already know you love and just analyze it now from a different point of view, right? Analyze it from the point of view of spices and proportions. Another way to safely start experimenting is to think of a cuisine you love, look at a few recipes from there, find a cookbook from someone who's from that place, look at the spices that are in there and start using those pairings to get you started. Because then if you like that cuisine, when you put those spices together, you'll also be drawing from the herbs and the aromatics that will make them really shine. So those are 2 ways to help make sure that you're pairing things that taste great, right? Another way is once you're experimenting, take an hour, make a big batch of popcorn, make your spice blends, bloom them in oil or butter, and try them on little bunches of popcorn, because the popcorn's so neutral, right? You can do the same thing with bread and dipping it in oil, but I actually find like the popcorn is even more neutral than bread. So that's a great way. You'd be like, oh yeah, those 3 spices, they work super, super well together. And then you can make notes and you'll feel safer with dinner. A few things in the moment: turmeric, nutmeg, the spicier chilies, and smoked paprika. Those are some common spices. And like I said earlier, thyme. Those start with just a small portion, right? Because you can always add more, you can't take them out. So those are powerful spices that are that you want to just start with a little less of, because a little goes a long way. To balance something, if you get into a pickle, right, and you're like, ooh, this is spicy, you need to think about other culinary tricks. So spicy is counteracted or mellowed out by fat or sweet. So you may not actually want to add another spice. You may want to add another pinch of sugar or a dollop of yogurt or something just to dissipate the spice. And knowing that something really sweet, like if you use way too many of your sweet spices and you're making a savory dish, then you might want to add in a chili flake or an herb, because to create contrast, right? Or it's actually a spice from any of the other 3 categories. Another thing, if something's really sweet or overly sweet, is to add a little more salt, add fresh herbs, or add a little acid at the end. So you may balance it. So that last one's trickier because you need a bigger depth of culinary knowledge. But you're sort of balancing the flavor mishap with another flavor that may be a spice or not. But the beginning stuff is really where I'd start. Find a recipe you like, look at those spices, find a cuisine you like, find a cookbook, look at the spices in there, start playing with them, make yourself a big bowl of popcorn and have fun for an hour. It's amazing what you'll get done in an hour.
This sounds like a great activity for the family in the holiday time.
It is, it really is. Or you by yourself, which is what I do a lot.
Also wonderful. Another quick question. So we talked a little bit about fresh herbs versus dried herbs and different proportions. Can you tell us a little bit more about, let's say we're subbing in a recipe, and this happens to me all the time. You didn't buy the dill at the grocery store and you need to use dried. What's the right proportion and how do you start to balance that in your dish?
So what I wouldn't actually do is substitute if something calls for a dry or fresh herb with the reverse. So if something calls for a fresh herb, I wouldn't put in its dried version because they're actually wildly different flavors. How I think about substitutions and how we talk about them in our classes is stop giving the ingredient its name that you associate with it, and instead think about the work it does. So instead categorize it as, is it acidic? Is it bitter? What flavor, what texture? Does it warm up the dish or does it cool down the dish? Then replace that work. So if I didn't have fresh dill, I would think, okay, it's brightening my dish at the end. It's giving some, maybe I'm making a stew and it's that bright pop at the end. It's adding often some bitterness if it's an herb, and some minerality and a lot of brightness. So I'd choose another fresh herb. And in the case of dill, I would choose tarragon or cilantro, most likely, depending on the dish. I do the same thing with a dried herb. So if I didn't have thyme, that flavor is so different than fresh thyme. I would look for a dried herb that had some similar characteristics, which for me would be, it's like not the replacements I would use fresh, again, because they're so different. It would be a dried oregano that I would use.
That's great. Well, I just want to do a quick time check. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to check the chat and see if we have any that come through. I'll tell you what, I'm ready to go pop some popcorn in the microwave down the hall. Okay, so we do have a final question, and that is, in which category on your chart would you include sumac?
I'm so glad we got this question because I forgot to say, our chart is not all inclusive. It is a beginner's chart. We had to draw lines somewhere. Even the 4 lines in the chart, they're actually continuums. Ginger was in warming. If you use good quality fresh ginger and a lot of it, dried fresh ginger, and a lot of it, it's in the peppery category or fiery category. So that is just a way for you to start the basics, and not all spices that we love made it on there within the categories, or categories like sumac is quite tart. So there are a small number of like dried berries that create tartness and sourness in your food that are amazing, and they just didn't make it on the sheet because there are so few of them, and this is really just a place to start. So great question. I love sumac. I hope you all use it. You can maybe make a 5th little category over in the corner on your own chart at home.
That sounds great. Well, we want to thank you so much, Rosie, and the team at Milk Street. We're really thrilled that you were able to join us today. And to all of you in our audience, we're really grateful to be able to offer these special opportunities as a special thank you to you for your continued support of PBS KVIE. We appreciate you, and I hope that you will tune in for Milk Street Television, which is Saturdays at 11 a.m. on PBS KVIE. You can stream on your schedule using your Passport benefit and the PBS KVIE video app, and be sure to watch your email for forthcoming virtual programs. So thank you so much. We'll see you again soon, and we will have that recording out very soon if you want to get your popcorn ready or make that chickpea recipe again. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.